Dorsey, you implemented the Ninetales mission, which allowed players to fight on either side of the conflict. How does the gameplay experience differ depending upon which side you choose to support? And can you explain how this actually, in the end, wound up being a server optimization of sorts?
Well, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head. What happens differently is if you are on the lawful side, you are working for Crusader Security, they are sending out scanning ships to try and locate the Ninetales fleet. And you have to go and protect those. And then once you have found that fleet, you go and destroy that fleet. You are killing ships until you basically deplete their resources and make them retreat from the area. On the Ninetales side of that, you are, of course, going and hunting those scanning ships. You are given their locations and you're told, hey, go destroy these. And then once the fleet portion of it gets found, you go and try to defend that fleet. And if you can hold them off for long enough, then Ninetales will actually win, and Crusader will be unable to drive them away before they achieve their objective, essentially, which is a hidden objective that we aren't revealing at this time.
But we are now.
But, well, the genesis of this, though, Ninetales was not originally actually supposed to be a PvP event at all. It was, much like Xenothreat, supposed to be just pure PvE. That had performance problems, frankly. Spawning enough ships in a pure giant fleet battle to challenge 30 to 50 players made the server just tank. It was incredibly painful, and it just didn't play very well. It also, to be honest, was the same thing as what Xenothreat already had done, and I wanted to do something a little different. And that kind of combined into this push to get the aforementioned kind of duct tape solution for hostility in, so that you can align on both sides. And by doing that, I make it so that I don't need to spawn ships to challenge 30 to 50 people. If things are running smoothly, I have 25 versus 25, and I don't need to spawn really just about anything.
Right. You bring the NPCs in just to flesh out, to
fill,
even the odds, to get the challenge, to the level you need. But when you actually have players that will legitimately fulfill a particular role, you take advantage of that.
Yeah.
It was a creative way to load balance the mission and the population in the area.
I would say, though, that in general, this is 100% exactly what we do want to do, which is we want to give the players the total freedom to basically do whatever they want, and then, as I always say, it's like, they live with the consequences, they live with the repercussions of their actions. If you go and support Ninetales, if you support Xenothreat, it's like, that will have, an impact on how people view you, the aforementioned reputation system, and you're standing with, with key NPCs within the game, and how the UE views you, and, whether or not certain organizations want to allow you within their ranks. And some of these things you do will have long-standing impact, where if you ally yourself with a group, like the Ninetales, you may be prohibited from joining some organization that you've been aspiring to for a very long time.
Unless you do something to work that back. Like, you gotta
and
earn
it's a
that
balance,
trust.
right? And we want those scales to go one way or the other. It's not that we want you to be able to be perfect with everybody all the time. Like that, it comes at a cost.
It depends upon the severity, right? Which is, if you do jaywalking, well, then sure, someone is not going to find it that difficult to basically assume that from now on you'll stay on the right side of the law, so we'll go ahead and let you into our transport guild. If, on the other hand, you're committing acts of piracy and murder and everything else, it's like, oh, well, now I'm not sure that I actually want you in our organization, which adheres to all the laws of the nearby area and everything of that sort.
That element of being able to pick your side and do what you want to do in the game is something that, because of that, we want to allow in pretty much every piece of our content going forward.
It needs to be
as much as possible.
Ingrained in the game with everything else.
The only reason we haven't, traditionally supported it is it's
the tech.
It's well, and to a large degree, that you can call out a few specific pieces of the tech, right? Which is the reputation system certainly plays a role. The lack of a reputation-based hostility system. We're still using the old faction system. For Xenothreat, that was literally the #1 reason why early in the development process we nixed it. On Ninetales, we were literally within weeks of release, and it was going to bother me to put out a second one that had the exact same limitations as the first, and so despite the fact that it was going to be an unattractive hack to fix it, I wanted to fix it. It did. It completely changed the experience, and so it is what I always refer to as it's duct tape. We'll get some value out of it as soon and as quickly as we can. Convert the hostility system over to the the proper reputational version. We'll do that, but in general, for the short run, we can continue to use this hack for some other missions that we have in the hopper.
And once we have that reputation version in, like, we will update Ninetales to handle that, and it will play better as a result.
Yeah, that's actually another point that I wanted to touch on a little bit, which is, so we did Xenothreat, and we released it, and then we basically brought it back and did some relatively mild alterations. We changed how 2 middle phases basically transitioned automatically between them as opposed to being distinct, so that we could have the whole salvage process, and then you had the climactic battle, and it kind of rolled around, but there was still salvaging during the later part. On Ninetales, we basically released it, and you've already identified a number of shortcomings with it that you want to address, not just for 3.15, but even beyond that. And this is something. So I want to get to that in a second, but this is something that we're going to continue to do with a lot of these dynamic events. They're intended not as one-shot missions. You play them for a month, a quarter, 6 months, and then we lose interest and we move to other stuff. The basic idea for these things is these events represent some sort of
Archetype, almost?
Yeah, well, I'd say they represent, it's almost like a customized chunk of gameplay. It's pirates have locked down an area, or Xenothreat has decided to invade the solar system, or pirates have basically run amok over in this area, or drug runners have completely seized control of these manufacturing facilities, et cetera, et cetera. And the idea is that we'll have all of this information over within Quantum, and then we'll look within our extensive library of these events, and we'll decide which one most closely matches that. We'll customize it as appropriate and then trigger it. And so the idea is that we're layering all of this custom handcrafted designer content onto this systemic background. And so we really get the best of both worlds. We get a nice, logical, systemic universe that ebbs and flows, it evolves, it basically changes logically in response to player actions. But at the same time, we get all of the incredible stories and the explicit dialogue and the intricately designed challenges that a designer has put a lot of time and thought and effort into doing. And so you really get both of these blended together. But back to Ninetales, so on 3.15, we're going to tweak a couple of the problems that you've identified. So you want to start with that?
They're relatively small things, honestly, just due to the schedule. It's probably the most impactful one and the one that I've seen the most people talking about. There is a portion of Ninetales on the lawful side where you can deliver medical supplies to the blockaded station for a bit of an extra reward. They will pay you a little bit more if you have a certain mission, and also their inventory is just very rapidly depleting, so you can pretty much always sell there, and you will be selling at the best price that they can offer. The problem that occurs there is that everybody buys all of the medical supplies out there. And while that's really cool on a realism statement, with the game in the state it is and with trading in the state it is, that means that a lot of people can't participate in that part of the mission, and that's problematic, particularly at this point where we want to be testing how those play. We really want people engaging in that part of things. Those of you who were part of the first wave of Evocati when we first tested this way back might actually remember that we originally had shop modifiers on the places that were selling medical supplies to make it so that they had a higher inventory that refreshed fairly frequently so that everyone could kind of engage in that. We were asked to remove those so that we could emphasize the derelicts, which are around the station that you can take medical supplies off of, because basically the derelicts made it so that there was another way to get those medical supplies, but they didn't. It took so much more time that there was really no reason to do that if you could do the
it actually goes back to what you were talking about earlier, which is I can buy them instantaneously from the shop and there's no loading time, and then I can move them over here and I can instantly unload them. If I had to physically pull them off, you could more easily balance these things. Whereas right now, I really do have to go manually pull each individual one off of the derelict ship. And so I'm incurring all of the the physicalized cargo expense on one side and not on the other. And so in the end, sure, just due to the sheer amount of time, it's like it takes me 30 minutes to get 12 boxes this way, or I can go buy 50 boxes, in a split second. Which one are you going to do?
Some people might still do the derelict because they're fun, frankly. It's a fun little FPS raid, but a lot of people are going to look at the dollar signs and just go, okay, this is obviously the better option. That being said, we're probably going to put back in, it's actually a pretty easy, I left them in there because I had a feeling we might want them back. We're just going to flip a switch and probably put those shop modifiers back in. We've seen how people play the derelicts. There's plenty of them in Xenothreat. We want to see the trading, frankly, and so that will allow that to come back online. Another relatively small change that is probably going to be coming in. We are seeing that many people are not engaging with the criminal side of things, and that is very much like the whole thing that we were doing with making it into a PvP mission for the purposes of helping performance.
We're going to have to
gets
better
lost.
entice them to basically fight on the side
Exactly.
of the Ninetales.
We need to entice them. So that means, I mean, they already are being paid more than the other side. I'm probably going to up that even more, frankly. They are going to become very lucrative, hopefully. That is the short-term solution.
And this is where, like, ideally, helping out the Ninetales building reputation, ideally, we would be able to offer other benefits of being in that organization, other things that some percentage of the players would aspire to and want, other rewards that you get for building up your standing with them.
Which won't be for 315,
100%.
but that is definitely where that is intended to go. The other thing that we might want there is a system to dynamically modify jurisdiction, because one of the big punish points that happens to a criminal when they are helping on that side in that area, despite the fact that Ninetales has supposedly taken over this area, when they get killed, they go to jail, which is a bit weird, frankly. We originally did want to make it so that you wouldn't get brought to jail, but there just wasn't enough time to fit the tech into the schedule. There still won't be for 315, but that is a longer-term thing that we want to have, is the ability to kind of dynamically modify these jurisdictions.
That sheds light on a problem, right?
Yeah.
Like exactly.
Yeah. It was one we kind of saw coming, but frankly, it was good to have it confirmed, and now we can hopefully put some pressure on that happening.
Yeah, we have a lot of those. Like we added we added the shop modifiers, we had the probability volume modifiers, we added the ability to do the quantum lockdowns through the dynamic events and stuff. We haven't yet added the ability to add the dynamic population modifiers. And so this one was, as you said, we knew this was going to be an issue. You can't necessarily get everything you'd like into every release. And so the point is, we got Ninetales out. You had some other longer-term things that you wanted to address as well. Can you talk about those?
Well, some of them, frankly, are just things that are going to be things that will naturally happen, to be honest. Performance is still a big problem.
I do want to talk to the performance thing for a second, which is
some progress. It's been definitely better.
We basically generated something on the order of 120, 130 different individual gyros that people were addressing in the run-up to Xenothreat. Because what inevitably winds up happening is we get performance to a certain level, and then we're basically adding more locations. We're basically enhancing the AI logic. We're adding new functionality, and so it's always a running battle to where you're adding more you're adding more stuff as you're making other stuff run faster, and so you tend to get a net wash. And we actually found ourselves with Xenothreat. One of the reasons we held it for a couple of extra weeks was we wound up finding ourselves in a very bad spot to where there are problems now. We're very familiar with them. They were much worse, just a few, when we were originally supposed to release it. We fixed it was an endless litany of these things to where it's like, on profiles, things showing up, stalling the main thread 100 milliseconds, 200 milliseconds. Those are getting cut down to a millisecond here, 2 milliseconds, but there's just such a quantity. And so what I want to touch on a little bit is as we finalized some bits of tech, like part of the reason we were able to devote as much time to getting things back into at least what I'd call an acceptable state, not a great state. We've got a lot more work to do to get this thing to the level of performance we want. There's a lot of problems, the rubber banding that we're intimately familiar with. We absolutely positively want to deal with it. It drives us. We all hate it. We want to fix it. But as some of these people roll off of things like their server meshing, tasks and stuff, we're now getting to the point to where we can keep people focused on this particular problem for certainly a longer period of time than they've been able to do in the past.
It's just a matter of that being the focus.
That's exactly it. It's just a matter of it being the focus.
A lot of the engineers that are working on server meshing are the people that would be fixing these optimization problems, right? So your game's going to run as fast as your biggest bottleneck, and that's about it, right? And you're going to hit the next one and the next one, and you're going to keep fixing them until your game runs a little better.
It was almost an endless litany of spawn stalls, entity, deletion stalls, and it was impressive to see how quickly those guys were eradicating, some of these really, really
big
egregious, performance, impactors.
Like 300-400 millisecond spikes going down.
Going down to
one or two
milliseconds.
Right?
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
enormous.
We spend a lot of time crafting to make sure that these waves are coming at the appropriate amount of difficulty for the number of players that are there, and all this stuff. And if the spawn queue starts to slow down, that kind of snarls. It just doesn't work. You can't design a great experience. You can design an okay experience, but not a great one.
As you know, on Ninetales, I know we played with this quite a bit.
Yes.
We definitely did on Xenothreat, where it's like, well, we want to bring in 10 guys at once to present a certain amount of challenge, but then you've got to like spawn them all simultaneously, and so we wind up bringing them in one at a time. So we're basically distributing the spawn load over time. And while it's true that on average the amount of challenge you're going to face will be identical, there is a big difference between 10 ships showing up at once versus one. And it was the same thing with the number of capital ships was originally larger, and we had to whittle that down. And so as the performance gradually improves, obviously we'll basically start to expand our ambitions in terms of what we're what kind of experiences we're actually putting out there for players.
And the existing ones will just improve, frankly. Those missions will almost become new beasts just by the very nature of that happening. And that's what, when you say, like, what is the long-term thing, that to me is the biggest thing, because a lot of these events will just be better.
You're currently working on a sequel of sorts called Jumptown V2. Can you go into some more detail about what players can expect from that with the initial release?
Yeah. It's actually, I'm trying to keep it very, very simple. Jumptown was originally this community event, and I want to keep that vibe as much as possible. I'm trying to have a very light hand. So what I'm doing is I'm basically taking a location. I'm going to make it so that it starts to spawn physically a bunch of boxes of a very lucrative material, in this case, maize, commodity, and that will then, it'll start to spit that out at a certain rate, which will entice people to go there and collect it, put it on their ships, fly it away, whatever. But the point there is that is an area that will be very, very lucrative for a short period, which will entice a lot of people to conflict over it. When you've got a place that is popping out a box of maize for free that you can just pick up at every 30 seconds or so, like that is dollar signs, and people will kill for that. Not only because it's fun, but also because it's worth it, frankly. So essentially, there is a location, there is a thing that spawns these boxes, and I'm going to turn it on. And that's about it.
One of the things I didn't like about the original Jumptown was it was at a fixed location, and it was always on, and it basically spit these things out at a certain frequency.
Outside of the fact that it was a bug, but yeah.
So, but it was
very static.
Yes, that's exactly it. And in general, I hate static things because it's always the same. So let's talk a little bit about Jumptown V2 is being designed as a dynamic event, and it's also extremely configurable. So we're going to start with support for any of the drug labs, although that's really just a function of whether or not we could get environmental art team support for the other areas. Longer term, we will be able to activate this at a wide variety of different locations.
The concept itself is pretty simple, and it can be worked at all these different places.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sure, but there's a lot of things like we put a lot of thought into recording additional lines of dialogue to support different types of drugs or different types of commodities. We have some generic lines so it can apply to all the stuff that's
anything. We don't want to be hampered by that, because the lead-in time for getting that dialogue can be a little bit damaging to doing just quick ads, frankly. Like, we want to be able to just say during a quarter, hey, it'd be really cool if there was an underground facility that was pumping out data or metal or at a refinery, and we want people to fight over that, and we can just add that because we planned ahead.
So we've got dynamism for Jumptown V2 with respect to location. We've got dynamism with respect to what exactly it's going to be pumping out. Another one that I wanted to support was the quantity. In other words, how long will this thing be spitting it out? Is it going to spit out 100, 100 SEU of cargo, or 1,000, 100 units of drugs, or 10,000? And this was something, again, so it's been configured as a dynamic event to where it can have this information passed into it and then configure itself as appropriate.
At runtime. Like, that means whoever or whatever.
That's the critical part.
It currently is launched by a person who is literally like pressing a button on a page. And when they do, they can enter in a bunch of variables, and those will determine where it's happening, what it's spitting out, how long it's going to last, how fast.
Yeah, I'll actually talk about that a little bit later, to where right now, all of the events that we've launched so far are triggered, via Quasar, and a person goes in, specifies the event, specifies the inputs,
and you'll talk about it being
100%.
driven.
Jumptown V2, another one of the specific design objectives was to use it as the first test case for these systemic triggers, to where we can actually have quantum inject this information dynamically. And so, like right now, we're running Ninetales, and one of the complaints that I've seen is, hey, it doesn't fire, often enough. It's like I missed it, and then it's gone. And so, one of the directions in which we want to go is having some of these events, like Jumptown, which can be triggered by player actions or Quanta, or player and Quanta basically doing whatever we determine. Maybe it is a certain amount of drugs are being bought, sold, lots of drug runners are basically traversing this shipping lane. Whatever kind of conditions we want to put, and then we can measure both on the quantum side, eventually, and then even in the short term, on the players, is like how many players are basically moving drugs back and forth here? Yeah. How many players are basically, dropping commodities off at this location? And if we have a dynamic event compatible with whatever these, whatever these conditions are, then we can go ahead and automatically trigger it and inject those customized parameters into it, so that it basically more accurately represents what's actually going on in that area.
Right now, we're just shortchanging that, but eventually, yeah.
That's actually, I like the whole Jumptown concept, but my favorite aspect by far is the fact that it's being designed as a test case for some of this up and coming systemic technology on the back end, so that we can start to go, oh, at 3 a.m. conditions were met, and we're going to go ahead and trigger Jumptown on Lyria, and we're basically going to put this particular drug into it, and it's going to be 679 units of drugs, and however quickly players are there to basically pull those things out, that will be how long it lasts. And so all of a sudden you have it's a transient event, which is sometimes we may inject, if we can scale this however we want, such that when these conditions are met, do we take the total number of delivered drugs or whatever and multiply times 10? So we can basically turn it into something that's going to range for an hour, a day, or 10 days, or whatever else. But we can add that variable factor to where it's not always a constant. It's not always on for the entire for the entire lifetime of the release. It's not always 7 days. There's actually going to be it's going to depend upon what is really happening within the world, and that's going to cause it to be customized.
It's just something that's happening in the game. I mean, it's natural events triggering in the world.
You mentioned people saying like Ninetales wasn't happening enough, and they would log on and they would wait for it to happen. That is not the goal. The goal is I log on and I see something is happening. There should always be an event of some kind that you could go and do. Maybe you log on, you want to do this particular thing, but also, oh man, that's happening right now? Cool, kind of thing. So
yeah, there will be some of both. Xenothreat is obviously the big ones, and then you've got what I'd call like the mid-range things like the Ninetales and stuff, where you're locking down an entire area, and all of a sudden we've cordoned off a region, and we're not allowing you to easily transport cargo back and forth to there, which basically starts knocking the prices up, which is why we added all the the price alerts and things like that, so that you can actually be enticed by the fact that, oh, this area that's been choked off, they really, really need copper. They're willing to pay this. Don't you want to try to break through the blockade? That actually does kind of get to what you were saying earlier in terms of allowing some of the player ships that are going to, or some of the NPCs that are going to interdict you to actually be more effective at it as we start to expand those quantum interdiction zones to a larger size.
It all interconnects.
Yeah, and it can be influenced by players or the back-end simulation. It's something that we'll be able to balance. We'll be able to pull analytics from the back-end. It's measurable, and it'll be something we can tune over time.
Another one on another point worth talking about on Jumptown for future directions forward is, and you and I have had this conversation a couple of times, is I would like to eventually be able to have NPCs basically fill in the other side. Like now, one of the inherent flaws in it is it's purely PvP, right? Which is I go there, I basically control that area, I get the loot for as long as it's pumping it out, and unless other players come and try to basically kick you out of that area, it's a cakewalk. And what we would want to be able to simulate, obviously, is if players are not going there, would Quanta, over on the simulation side, would they be attracted to, this value generator? Of course they would. Great. At what rate? And what rate's going to depend upon what it's spitting out, what the street, value of that stuff is, how far it is from civilization, and they therefore have to travel, et cetera. And so the point would be that we want to be able to, just as we were talking about earlier, we want to, with Ninetales, to where we were aligning, players on either side and saying we'll use NPCs to basically, to balance it however we want. In this case, if there are 0 players on on the attacking side trying to take it over, well, we're going to have to fill those ranks with NPCs.
That being said, one of the things that is called out very often as being an exciting portion of Jumptown, the original, was going there and not knowing if you were going to find resistance. That can kind of keep you on the edge of your seat a little bit. There's that, it's too quiet. So it won't always be
100%, but you don't need that uncertainty doesn't necessarily need to only come as a result of whether or not players are willing to do it. We can have uncertainty on the NPC side and say, maybe we will, maybe we won't, basically, have them assault. Maybe they'll come in a straggler, one guy at a time. Maybe they'll come in a big coordinated group of 12 NPCs, all in heavy armor, armed to the tooth, and and you'll basically be doing your absolute best, to hold that, calling your friends, et cetera, et cetera. The point is, right now, unless we have the ability to basically set those scenarios up, then some players on some servers will never get that cool experience of a whole burst of guys arriving at one shot, or the stragglers. Now, if players are basically going in there attacking, well, sure, I've already got 20 players on this side. Maybe I don't need to throw any other NPCs out to
Or maybe I want to add fuel to the fire, frankly.
Or maybe you want to throw
Players were very creative in the first one.
Yeah, and that's honestly what I'm really looking forward to is what is the tools that have been added to the sandbox at this point. It's such a simple event. I really am looking forward to seeing how they handle it. You can come in a land vehicle, and you can set up a tank or a ballista and just pick people out of the sky, defend that area, turn it into a fortress. You can have dogfights in the air over it. You can, if you're stupid and you leave your ship turned off with its shields off, someone's gonna blow that up.
You and I talked in the early stages of Ninetales about the fact that it's a drug lab. Why is it basically spitting these things out? And the idea would be, well, they've produced a lot of them at that location, and so who would be one of the most logical people to come and try to take back control? It would be the guys that that basically originally had control of that drug lab. It'd be whatever criminal organization we want to basically have that thing,
or a competition.
100%. And so you could see players are in there basically reaping the rewards. Another player team assaults them, and now the much larger threat comes, and the players it could be a 3-way. The players could team up, with each other to basically hold them off and then split the goods, et cetera, et cetera. So the real point, to my mind, is it just comes back to is configurability, which is I want to be able to vary the location, vary the the type of material, vary the quantity of that material and the frequency with which it's produced. I want to be able to vary the challenges you'll face trying to basically hold it, and all of a sudden that starts to become representative of what we're trying to do with all these different dynamic events, which is we want to make templates that we can. I always call it object-oriented content creation. It's such a common concept over on the coding side. You don't really see much focus over on the content creation to basically put all of these rules and procedures and processes in place so that you can basically build nice modular chunks of content and easily link them to other pieces so that you're not reinventing the wheel every time you're doing this. Like a good, a good example is the spawn closets that we're doing, over for some of the infiltrator missions that we'll be talking about. It's like that's absolutely going to play a factor in some of these, future iterations of things like, whether it's Ninetales. You could see Ninetales eventually, supporting on the derelicts. Some of those derelicts actually have Ninetales members on them that we can basically create 2 or 20. We can create them over time. We can basically, change,
or taking over the station. There's so many things you can do with that. So.
Yeah, Pyro is going to be a good test bed for a lot of that stuff, just with the strife that is supposed to be going on out there.
So, looking forward to it.
All right, let's bring Luke into the conversation now. We started working on the Xenothreat event around March of 2020, and it took about a year to get it out the door. We knew that it was going to be extremely difficult because we were missing so much of what we needed, including everything from the dynamic mission service that would drive the back-end logic, to the capital ship AI, target prioritization for turrets, functional countermeasures, tons of dialogue, and countless other things. Part of the allure, though, was that in one shot, we'd have a great test case for a litany of important features, like battles far larger than anything we'd previously done, and a testbed for creating missions that supported a variety of different playstyles, like ship-to-ship combat and salvaging. So, Luke, from your perspective, what were some of the big lessons we learned from Xenothreat?
Well, Xenothreat was our first attempt at a large-scale fleet battle, so we learned a lot. The biggest takeaway was that we needed to develop our overly simplistic friendly fire system, which was leading to players receiving unfair crime stats and being kicked from the mission. So in the recent re-release of the event, we made major improvements to our friendly fire detection and tolerances, which drastically cut down on unfair crime stats according to the feedback and analytics we received. What's great is this kind of change improves the whole game, not just the event, and paves the way for more large-scale space battles in the future. I think it's also important to add that another thing that became clear was that players wanted a counter mission involving PvP. So we've started planning with this in mind for subsequent releases.
Luke, as the performance gradually improves over the next few quarters, what sort of things would you most like to change about Xenothreat?
I think most people would expect my answer to be throw more AI at the player. But it might be that when performance improves, our AI becomes much deadlier, which could actually lead to us reducing their numbers. This balancing is always the most difficult part of mission creation. The AI's performance can be wildly different on our local servers versus what it might be like on an overtaxed live server. And if a mission is too easy, it's not just a case of throwing more AI at it, as this will only compound the performance issues. We were happy with the balancing we achieved, but it wasn't quite what we hoped for. Once performance is improved, we hope to rebalance and deliver the experience we intended.
Luke, we've invested a lot of engineering effort into our spawn closet tech, which allows us to precisely and intelligently push NPCs into and out of an area. The first major test of this tech will be the Infiltrator class of missions, which I wanted to provide much more varied and challenging FPS situations than anything we've previously seen. To that end, we can now determine at runtime the type and number of NPCs we want to insert at a location, often at the behest of Quantum. We can also apply a litany of rules to the spawning, like how many can be active at once, how the spawn rate changes when an alarm has gone off, and whether a boss might be found wandering the area with his guards or only after they've all been dispatched. The mission template supports a wide variety of objectives, ranging from killing everyone at that location to only killing select individuals, to protecting NPCs from any harm, to hacking computers, to extracting designated materials. Can you go over some of these mission variations in more detail?
Of course, Tony. The underground facilities were the locations we chose for our first implementation of spawn closets, so this is where players will find new missions, as well as some existing missions that have been vastly improved by the addition of spawn closets and non-combatants. One of the new missions sends players to kill a heavily armoured target who only shows himself once his crew have been wiped out. Another involves the players searching a friendly facility for a number of boxes identified using information provided on their mobiGlass. At any point during the mission, small enemy assaults can be triggered, and the thing I love about this one is that players can choose to avoid the fight and gamble on the facility's defenders being able to repel them. And the last one I'd like to mention is, thanks to spawn closets, we now have our first FPS defend mission where players join friendly AI in defending a facility from multiple waves of enemies. And the nice thing about this one is that in addition to the basic mission reward, players also receive bonuses for the AI who survive to the end.
Some of the benefits from this mission template are coming from smarter use of existing tech, like more modular subsumption logic, and some of it stems from new features like the spawn closets. Luke, how has the design setup of the Infiltrator scenario varied from what you've done in the past?
Well, spawn closets have had a dramatic effect on the types of missions we can build. Without them, we were unable to spawn AI mid-mission, as we couldn't risk them spawning out of thin air without warning, as that's really unfair on players. Thanks to spawn closets, we can now spawn reinforcement waves and spring ambushes anytime we want, with players able to recognise where AI is likely to reinforce from. Not only does this allow us to build brand new mission types, it allows us to spawn manageable amounts of AI and only reinforce when some of those are dead, to better balance the difficulty of the encounter. And you mentioned we're building our logic in a modular fashion, and the Eliminate Boss mission is a great example of that, because we've essentially taken the Eliminate All and Eliminate Specific objectives and combined them to create a new experience where players must draw their target out of hiding by first killing all of his crew.
Luke, another mission template we're currently working on is called Rescue Transport, and it revolves around getting NPCs to a specified location. One of the variations allows the NPC to request personal transport via a service beacon, just like a player, to a designated location. Other variations involve adding assorted complications to getting the NPCs on board your ship, like having to first outsmart or outfight their captors, unlocking their prison door to release them, safely escorting them back to your ship for transport to the desired drop site. Longer term, we're going to add support in this mission template for a lot of other combinations, like having to drag unconscious characters onto your ship and back to a hospital and trying to lead NPCs through a burning ship. Luke, where do we stand with the current implementation of this, and what remains to be done before we can push it out the door?
Well, Tony, we're at the point where we have a working prototype in which AI can be asked to follow, wait, and take a seat aboard your ship. And even with this rudimentary setup, we've been able to flesh out the mission flow to a very detailed degree, and have made a lot of headway into planning the dialogue requirements. We've gone some effort to make sure that the mission is more than a delivery mission where the box has legs, so the client has patience that can wear thin, with your tip and rating being calculated based on your performance. We'll also be developing AI behaviours to deal with what happens should the player decide to kidnap them. The rescue mission module has been designed in such a way that it can work in conjunction with others like Infiltrator, meaning that we can easily inject some obstacles in your way, like a base full of captors. These missions will drive the development of AI following, so once complete, we'll be able to leverage that throughout the rest of the game.